Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Charles Raether, managing partner here at AmLaw Group, where we work with successful entrepreneurs, business professionals, and investors to help you make your transition to the U.S. as effective, painless, and comfortable as possible. So today we're going to talk about one aspect of the E-2 visa, which is of increasing interest. Can you have multiple investors in an E-2 business, and how does that actually work? So the short answer is yes. The long answer is, but you got to make sure you do everything correctly. So let's dive into what those requirements are that would allow you to have two investors in an E2 business. So as you probably know, one of the main criteria for an E2 business, besides the fact that you have to have a qualifying passport, is that you have to show that the investor has control of this entity. And control is kind of defined in different ways for different visa categories. But for the E2, control is basically 50%. So even if you don't have control in the sense that, well, you have 50%, your partner can't make a decision without you, that's enough in the eyes of immigration to be deemed as control. That basically you have a veto power over your partner. The other requirement is that each person, each investor, has to invest that minimum amount that we generally talk about. So if you've been watching our videos, you know we generally say that that minimum amount is about $100,000. Could be less, maybe $90,000, maybe even $80,000. But each investor needs to make that contribution. So if you have two investors, you can't say, well, together they invested $100K, 50 from with this guy, 50K from the other. That's not going to work. Everybody's got to make that minimum investment. What else? We need to show that each investor has control. So we've shown ownership, right? That they both have 50%. The control part is in this scenario generally pretty easy. You certainly could have a shareholder agreement or partnership agreement or membership agreement, if you want to call it that, for an LLC, where it kind of lays out all the obligations and the duties, and it says, okay, this partner can't do anything without the approval or consent, et cetera. But when you're in a situation where it's exactly 50%, generally the officers understand, okay, it's kind of deadlocked. Nobody can make one decision without the other guy's approval. So in terms of proving the control aspect of the E2, it's pretty straightforward in an E2 context where you both have 50% because, by default, each one's going to have a veto power over the other one. Now, some people might ask, does this raise or lower the chances of an approval if I have two investors and they both have 50%? From my experience doing this almost 20 years, I've never noticed a trend where, if you have two investors and filing for an E2, whether it's more likely or less likely. I suppose theoretically, there is a greater chance of problems with this if you have two investors, just because you have two people. So it's twice as likely that some problem might arise. I mean, it doesn't mean it's likely, but again, if you're just evaluating one investor, they might look at it and say, yeah, no problems. They look at the second investor's path of funds or source of funds, or maybe some other issues, then maybe there might be some issues. But again, that's not related just to the mere structure of having 50-50. One other question that often comes up is it better to have one investor file first, get the E2, and then the other one come later? Or should they file more or less at the same time? That's actually a very good question. I don't know if there's a clear answer to that. I would say that generally we tend to tell clients to have one go first and then have the second go later. If only because it's just a little bit easier that if there is a problem with that first applicant, and like I said, chances are there won't be. It depends where these applicants are from. We've never had a denial from a Canadian applicant, never had one from a UK applicant. If you're maybe coming from Eastern Europe, yeah, your chances of a denial might be a little bit higher. But usually we say, pick out of the two who you want to get the E2 first, get that solidified, and then we'll come back with the second. I mean, that's generally a little bit of a safer way to go than if you have both going in there. Because if for whatever reason that officer has some kind of questions or challenges, you might get two denials right away, and you don't want that. So better if we get one denial, and if we do get the denial, at least understand what is it? Is it related to the applicant himself, some other reason, and we can make those adjustments before sending the second person over. So I hope this was a great overview to give an understanding of what's required when you've got two applicants filing. And I should mention that these applicants can be from any country. So you could have somebody from Italy and Canada. You could have somebody from Kazakhstan and Poland. It really doesn't matter. And in the other thing, and you should watch our videos, we'll have a video coming out on this in the near future, is once you establish you have different owners, say you got one from Kazakhstan and from the UK, then you can invite over what are called essential workers from these two countries. And then you could bring over E-2 employees from the UK or from Kazakhstan. Now here's a tough question. And I'm going to leave this question for you as food for thought. But there's certain cases where if you have two co-owners, do those two co-owner investors have to have an E-2 visa before they have their employees filed? The answer is it depends. So stay with us. In the near future, we'll be doing a video on that as well. But it's a relatively complicated topic. But if anything, it just opens up your opportunities as to what countries you can draw on to bring your essential employees over. So that's really interesting stuff, especially if you're looking to bring over some skilled people from your home country. Stay with us for further updates, and I look forward to our next talk about E-2 visas.